So should we be working from home or working in the office? Let's break it down. Hi, I'm Mark Hensley. I am a software developer and I have been working in IT and tech for about the last 6 years. So I have a wide range of different work experiences that I want to go over. When I first started when I was in college, I did a job that was completely remote with very little interaction for about 2 years. Then from there, I got an internship with a company called ServiceNow. That was completely in person, and I did that for a year. And now I've been working a full-time job, and that started out completely in person, then went to completely work from home, and is now a mix of those two things. So I want to use this experience to kind of weigh the pros and cons of working from home and kind of make the decision as to should we be going back into the office or not. Now, I am a software developer, so most of my job can be done from home, but I do need to go in sometimes for certain things. And I do go in sometimes just because I want to go in. Now, I'll get into a little bit more of that, but let's get to our first point. So the first point is this would be bad for new people. So, of course, when I say this, I mean the move to working from home. And I do see some real merit in this argument. Honestly, you can imagine if you were a person that started new somewhere and it was in person, you know, the experiences you went through, and try to imagine going through them if it was a working from home remote job. Well, I can actually tell you a little bit about that. My first job in tech was working as what's known as an SEO, which basically meant I would spend my time between either adding websites to social media and doing a little bit of advertising and modifying the website, updating it, and things like that. Now, I really didn't have that many problems starting out being fully remote, and at this time not really having tools like Zoom and other things we have to make it really easy to communicate. In fact, at that job, we almost entirely worked through chat. And I will say, I probably was a bit more intimidated in that than I would have been had it been in person in certain ways. I can remember sitting in my bedroom on my computer. You know, there was a good amount of time where I'm like, I really wonder if I'm supposed to be doing something that I'm not doing. But I was still able to get past that because I was connected with a mentor. This is somebody that I could get, you know, kind of on a call with, and they would walk me through things. And if I needed to do something, I could contact them. So there were a lot of times that it was very unnerving, but I was still able to get past that. Now, if I compare that to a new person's experience as I was at ServiceNow, which was completely in person, I actually found the experience to be somewhat similar. And that is to say, I would be connected with a mentor, and then if I needed their help with something or some kind of guidance or just need to know what I'm supposed to be doing, I would message them on Slack. And then at some point they might say on Slack, oh, can you come meet me at my cubicle? At that point we could converse in person. But even sometimes we would just do a video call of some type. And even though we were in the same building, we would just be using these remote tools anyway. So I actually don't see the experiences as being that different, aside from perhaps the fact that you don't really get to know the people as well personally, remotely, as you will generally tend to if you're in person. That has just been my experience. But I don't really see that as a huge loss, especially because over time that can change, especially in an organization where there is, you know, a lot of conversation going on. And where I work now, it's more like that, where, you know, the first job I had when it was remote, I would almost get lonely and I wouldn't talk to anyone all day. That was a little bit hard, but in the job I have now, even the days I work fully remote, I spend a good amount of time talking to people. So let's keep talking about the human connection that is lost with remote work. I would acknowledge that that is definitely the case, especially if you never have a chance to meet your coworkers in person, which is why I personally do like the, one reason I should say I like the hybrid approach where you have that ability still. But I can say with modern tools like Zoom, that barrier is much lower in my opinion. And I'm working with someone right now that I have never met in person, and I feel like we're able to form a pretty good connection. Now, to be fair, a little bit more of my history, I am almost 33. So when I was growing up, I played a lot of video games and I conversed a lot with people online. So it kind of comes a lot more naturally to me than it might to some other people, whether that be people that are older that didn't have that opportunity when they were kids because, the internet wasn't as big of a thing, or it's people that just weren't as much in that online environment when they were younger. And, there are a lot of people my age, probably most of the people my age, that were, the internet was there for them, but they didn't spend their childhood in it like I did. So I understand that there's a little bit of a barrier here, and with the human connection, I definitely also understand from my first job that not having any human interaction can be rough on you. And mind you, I did this part-time. Now that usually looked at, I'd do it all day one day and then, I'd be off the next. But still, thinking about doing that 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, having no human interaction, that would have probably taken its toll. So if you're somebody that's looking to do remote, I don't think I'd recommend doing it in such a way where you have almost no human interaction at all. I'm a developer, but I spend my time in, requirements meeting, operations meetings. I have plenty of human interaction even if I'm not in the office. So what about the special human interactions? And this is a thing I've been hearing a lot lately. I heard it a lot originally where I worked way back during the pandemic about this is something that we're going to lose, and that's these kind of special human interactions that you have with somebody that you haven't met at the water cooler, and it hatches this idea of collaboration with one another where a project ends up going in a very different direction, or maybe a new project is launched based on this conversation. Well, I can only speak from my own experience, and I wouldn't have included this, but I've been hearing it a lot at other companies. Maybe I haven't been in it for long enough, but I have never had one of these happen to me. I have had plenty of, what you would call water cooler talks where I'm talking to somebody that's in a related area, definitely areas I could collaborate with, and none of those conversations led to some big idea. There are plenty of big ideas, but that's never how they started. And most of the time it will start with, us having some kind of need in my area and then sort of finding the person that could help with that. And then that's how that big idea hatches. I've never had it just happen in a random conversation. I can't say I've never maybe been close. I definitely have had random conversations with, people where maybe things could have potentially happened, but they never did. So again, I'm not saying it's not a thing, but to lend my 2 cents to this, I don't know if you want to call it debate, it's never happened to me. And we've had plenty of big things happen, plenty of big collaborations, just never started that way. So distractions, let's talk about those. Now you might think I'm about to say there's so many less distractions at home than there are in the office. And for me personally, that's true. But I have enough interactions with others to know that that's not the case for everyone. I've been in plenty of Zoom meetings where, there's a dog barking in the background, or there is a child that is inquisitive or just is needy. Nothing wrong with that, being children. But what I'm trying to say is that our home environments as individuals are very different from one another. For me, I am all the way to one side of this, that I own this house. It is, all mine. I don't have any pets whatsoever. And basically, I am in control here. If I want to wire up my office in a certain way, I can. And in fact, one thing I've done is I've wired this house up to where if I lose electricity, my Zoom meeting will not be interrupted. So I've been able to prioritize my working from home stance where I realize a lot of people, they have a spouse to share their house with, they may have kids around, and they may, have animals, and animals, it's hard to tell them just to be quiet. The only thing that will ever interrupt me really is delivery, and that doesn't really happen that often. These days, most of the time, they just throw the package on the front door step. So I recognize that I have a different experience here in my working from home experience than others do. And I can see why other people would really be wanting to go back into the office, because if your home life is kind of more like what I grew up with, where there's animals and kids, me being one of those kids, obviously, I could see how it would be a more distracting environment than many offices would be. However, I can say when I compare my personal home office experience to my in-office experience, in-office is definitely much more distracting. And I know some people that also have it pretty bad. There'll be sometimes I'm in Zoom meetings and I'm working with somebody on something, a lot of times it's something they really are pushing to make work, and I can hear the distractions around them and sympathize with them, that there's people talking on either side of them. It sounds like there's just things going on in the background, and sometimes people will, try to interrupt them a little bit. So I definitely prefer my home office experience to theirs, but it can go the other way. That I, in my office at work, a lot of times I can be pretty solitary there too, and I will get on a meeting with somebody with dogs barking in the background, and every once in a while a child will come in and say, "Mommy, Mommy," and I can understand why maybe they would rather be in the office than where they are at home. Not to say they don't love their children, but they're being, more distracted. Let's talk about productivity. So everyone thought productivity was going to plummet when everyone started working from home. And for the most part, and I can only speak to, what I've seen, that didn't happen. People were just as productive from home as they were in the office. And that is to say that they got just as much done, in some cases more. Now, I'm not really exactly sure the wider reasoning for this, and I don't know that anyone is, and I can only speak for my experience with this. That one is I sort of see working from home as a privilege, and I want to respect that privilege. I feel like when I am supposed to be working, I should be working. Another thing I've noticed is that because I don't have the commute to worry about, I end up kind of working more hours, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And that's kind of simple. I'm still gonna wake up when I wake up, and what else do I have to do? And this is kind of what has been programmed to be on my mind at the beginning of the day, is starting the workday. So sometimes I'll just start early. And I work at least as hard at home as I do in the office. I'd say probably harder. And that's because I don't have as many distractions. But to me, I take my job very seriously, and it doesn't matter if I'm at home or in the office, I'm still highly motivated to have our stuff work. I'll be working on developing something, and I'm not only developing this because somebody's paying me to do this. I'm doing it because I want to produce a good product. I feel like part of the reason, I'm here is to make the world a better place and make software that makes people's lives better. And the fact that I'm working at home doesn't change that at all. In fact, I really try to leverage the strengths of working from home to end up with a better finished product, because really at the end of the day, that's what I care about, is I care about my work. I want my work to, reflect well on me. And so I work hard for that reason. That's, my really guiding reason. It's not just about getting a paycheck, and not to say I don't want the paycheck or I don't want to be paid well. Obviously I need that. And it is very important to me, but overall, I'm passionate about what I do. And I can say this for most people in software, or at least many, that we didn't get into this because we thought it was a quick way to get paid. And well, there were a lot of people that tried, and I met a lot of people in college that is what they wanted to do. They're like, I want to be a developer because it pays really well. Those people didn't tend to make it out, and they don't, tend to make it far, in my opinion. The people that you have working in these roles, especially the ones that have been able to, get as far as they are, they care about what they're doing. It's just as important to them as it is to their managers. And you've probably heard me say before in these videos, if I look tired in this video, it's because I am. And that's true in this video tonight too. Now, I am also working on a master's degree, but days like today, I didn't do any work on my master's degree. I just worked, and I worked hard, not because I want a bigger paycheck or because I feel like I'm forced to. I worked hard because I have a goal that I'm working towards, and I'm going to work as hard as I feel like I can to get closer to that goal. So what about team building? And I know team building alone sounds like a buzzword, but what I really mean is going back to human interaction, the ability for people to relate well to one another. I talked about those, the water cooler brilliance moments that, I've never had happen to me. But what I can say is being able to build relationships with people that I would eat lunch with that I didn't really know what they were doing at the time, what area they were working in. Being able to build good interpersonal relationships with them was beneficial, and the people I was able to do that with when I worked in person, I have an easier time approaching remotely. Now, I don't know how big of a difference that makes in my overall performance. I feel like I'm pretty willing to approach everyone, but I think this is another thing where everyone is, different. So actually, I have built myself to be the type of person that can, form good relationships in person, but that's, I recognize that that's not true for everyone. In that, I would say some people may actually be better at forming good relationships remotely. And I can say that from playing video games when I was a kid, that I was perfectly capable of building good relationships that way too. And, it's difficult to, I shouldn't say it's difficult, but it can be for a lot of us to build good relationships in person. Some of us consider ourselves awkward. And when we are doing things remotely, it makes us, it gives us the ability to mask some of that awkwardness. Now, I feel like I do pretty well on both sides, and honestly, at first, I thought I was really handicapped by the pandemic, but I think I'm almost evenly good at either one, building a relationship with somebody remotely or building it in person. But I also recognize, I feel like it's a bit harder in person, that you kind of have to watch yourself a little more, watch your facial expressions, don't stand in a weird place, that kind of stuff. I get it. So I think this is, again, something that's really individually based as far as how this works for you. Now, another concern, I've heard from management at different companies is that we'll lose company culture if we move to working remote. I don't agree with this really, because that's to sort of assume that company culture can be chopped down to the shapes of the vases in your office and, the weird trees and stuff like that. I don't think that's really what company culture is. In my experience, company culture didn't go anywhere. Now, that being said, when I spend extended periods of time working from home, I do feel a little bit more disconnected from the organization. But that is where, because I'm working more of a hybrid environment, if I feel that way, I can just go in. Now, I would say I recognize, though, that if you're going full remote, a little bit of that could sort of be lost, but I would say not most of it. I don't really think that company culture comes from, the decorations in the office. I think that it comes from the people that you hire and their personalities. And I will also say, I think it's a little bit more overblown of a thing than we tend to think, that, we think there's this overall company culture and we all believe in the same things and we all have the same attitude. And I don't think that's ever the case. In my experience, there's different groups and different departments and kind of different areas within companies and organizations, and those areas tend to differ more than even companies differ from one another. So I think the idea of company culture is a little bit overblown. I don't think most of it is lost with working remote, minus maybe if an employee has a strong sense of belonging for being in person where they work, they might lose a little bit of that feeling. So let's talk about the hybrid environment, which I think is really the best way to go. Now, the way that this works is there's a bunch of space that employees need. If people are working hybrid, that means sometimes they'll be working from home, sometimes they'll be in the office. Sometimes if they're in the office will be dictated by necessity, and sometimes they might just feel like working in the office that day. Now, this can work because it requires less space for the same amount of people. Now, the issue that a lot of organizations were left with, after the pandemic started to kind of subside, is that, well, we have all this space, so we need to bring the employees back to the office. But space is always at a premium, and if you have that much space, you can definitely fill it with less people and use it as you expand. So in the event that you're working hybrid, you don't really have a requirement anymore for each employee to have their own desk or their own office. And you can basically just have employees reserve desks or even offices when they need them. That way, one employee wants to come in one day, they reserve it. Another one comes in another day, they reserve it. And maybe you'll have periodic events where almost everyone comes in. And this can work because really, if you look at this across groups, departments, whatever organization that you have where you work, you're really never going to have everybody all there at the same time, except for maybe a few rare events, and you can find a way to deal with that. Now, I like this because it allows me to work from home, but still come into the office. Now, there are big downsides to it though, and this is, what I've experienced personally, that you kind of have to be where the battle is. And if I come into the office and nobody else is there, well, for me personally, where my home is, complete solitude, there was really no point in me coming in because all I'm going to do is be on Zoom meetings throughout the day and communicate by text or phone when I could have just as easily done that at home. But it still makes sense because there are times I will need to come in, like for in-person meetings, or if I'm working something that requires me to be in person. And so that, I think, is what the benefit is, but it's not this utopia of you kind of have half the people there and it's like halfway between office and remote. Usually, unless it's a substantial portion, it ends up just being remote with some people that are doing remote from the office, basically. But I still see it as superior. Now, of course, if you're a company and you want to go all remote, I also understand the logic in that now you can completely sell your office and save that money. That makes sense. And if you're a company and you want to go completely back to the office, well, I get that. And I'm the type of person that if that demand were made, I would go. But I also think there are a lot of people that you lose if you did that. And I'm looking at you, Tesla. All right, guys, I hope this helped. I hope this was informative. Again, this is just my opinion. I can really only speak from my experiences, and this is kind of the way I see remote work versus in the office work.